There was a kind of silence in our house that didn't feel restful. It was the kind that weighed heavy in the air, like the hush right before a tornado touches down. Some folks might call that peace. I used to call it that, too. I was the youngest daughter-in-law in the Holt family, which meant I kept my head down and my mouth shut. Julian, my husband, liked it that way. His family liked it even more. I wasn't loud, I didn't stir things up, I smoothed them over. Smiled through gritted teeth. That's what being the peacemaker meant in a household like ours. But peace wasn't the right word. It was quiet, yes, but never peaceful. There was something off in the way Julian would glance at his father before making a decision. Or how any time I tried to talk about money, the room got colder. And there it sat, right there on the counter that morning, a folded piece of paper. Neat, crisp. Our mortgage statement. Only it had my name on it, and I'd never signed for that loan. I worked part-time at the town library. I loved books, quiet spaces, routine. I brought home every paycheck and handed it over to the family account. No questions asked. That was the deal. That's what good wives did. Vernon, Julian's father, said he'd manage it all. For retirement, he said. For your future, Pauline. That man had a voice like an anchor, deep, slow, convincing. Everyone listened when he spoke, even when he was saying nothing. Every Sunday dinner, they'd gather around the table like clockwork. Roast beef, green beans, mashed potatoes. Vernon would sit at the head, talk numbers, and the whole family nodded along like a choir. That's our guy, Julian would laugh. Dad's a genius with finances. I believe them. You don't rock the boat in the Midwest. You smile. You nod. You say thank you, even when something inside you starts to ache. One night, well past midnight, I was balancing our checkbook, something I'd started doing in secret. That's when I saw it. A check, cashed from our joint account. Only it wasn't my handwriting. I didn't write it. I hadn't even seen it. I told myself it was a bank error. That's all. But 2 weeks later, it happened again. And this time, the amount was double. I asked Julian. He barely looked up from his phone. That's how Dad handles things. It's fine. Fine? I called my sister, Mary. She's always lived a few states away, married young, got out early. When I told her what I found, there was a pause on the line. Polly, that's not normal. That night, I pulled out a blank journal. I didn't know what I was doing exactly. But I started writing things down. Dates. Statements. Feelings. It felt like keeping record of a crime I wasn't sure had happened. That Sunday, I suggested something small at dinner. A budget, maybe. Something to help us see where our money went. I barely got the words out before Vernon laughed. Budget? We don't need that nonsense. You stick to books, Pauline. The room chuckled. Not loudly, just enough. Julian didn't say a word. My cheeks burned. You're too sensitive, his sister chimed in. Dad's just joking. Except he wasn't. He never was. Vernon sipped his iced tea like a king. Moved a few things around, he said casually. Smart planning. Long-term vision. Nobody asked for details. Nobody ever did. I nodded. Smiled. Then picked up the dishes. Quiet hands. Quiet eyes. Inside, though, I was screaming. I had a seat at that table. But not a voice. The next morning, I went through the mail like I always did. Junk. Ads. And then, one letter stopped me cold. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Vernon Holt. But under that, in smaller print, it said, Pauline M. Holt, primary account holder. A bank I didn't recognize. An account I didn't open. I stood in the kitchen. My fingers shook as I unfolded it. The letter said the account had been active for over 7 years. 7 years. I couldn't breathe. Mistake? Maybe. But deep down, something cracked open. A knowing. A bitter, heavy knowing. Had I been nothing more than a name to use? A pawn? I didn't yell. Didn't call anyone. I folded the letter back up. Walked to the bedroom. Pulled out my journal. Slipped the letter between the pages. That night, I didn't sleep. And for the first time in years, I didn't try to. The letter was still there, right where I'd left it the night before. I sat at the kitchen table, the early morning light spilling across the counter, catching the edge of the envelope like it meant something. My coffee had gone cold again, untouched. I stared at my name on the bank letter, typed, sharp, undeniable. I thought about calling. But the idea of trying to explain this, of asking questions I wasn't even sure how to phrase, made me hesitate. What if I sounded foolish? Or worse, paranoid? No. I needed answers, not someone's sympathy over the phone. I trusted too much, I whispered to no one. That was my first mistake. After work, I pulled into the bank parking lot. The lot was mostly empty, just a few pickups and sedans lined up in the fading autumn sun. My reflection in the glass door looked tired, flat. But I walked in anyway. Inside, everything smelled like disinfectant and too many signatures. A young woman in a navy blazer smiled too widely and asked if I needed help. I handed her the letter. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from Ms. Geller. Her glasses caught the fluorescent light as she scanned her screen. Yes, Pauline Holt. You're listed here as the secondary account holder. I blinked. Secondary? But it's my name. My social. My everything. Well, the primary account holder is Vernon Holt. She turned the monitor slightly but didn't let me touch it. It seems the account was opened under a joint management clause. A lot of these transfers, she tapped the screen, are automatic deposits from your paycheck. Every word she spoke layered another brick on my chest. Years of library shifts, handing over those paychecks without a second glance. I thought they were going into a family fund. Our fund. Ms. Geller cleared her throat, trying to sound gentle. You might consider speaking to a financial advisor. This arrangement isn't uncommon, but transparency matters. I nodded slowly, my hands flat on my knees to stop them from shaking. When I got to the car, I didn't drive. I just stared into the rearview mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back. How did I become the outsider in my own life? That night, dinner tasted like sawdust. Vernon was on one of his rolls, chuckling about financial wisdom and how some folks just aren't built for managing money. Julian laughed right along with him. I asked, carefully, about an account I'd never seen before. Julian didn't even look up. Dad knows what he's doing. That was it. I realized, in that moment, that my husband didn't see betrayal. He saw order. Legacy. The Holt way. I hadn't married a partner. I married a pecking order. So I smiled and passed the green beans, the same way I always did. But inside, something shifted. I wasn't sad. I was studying. Later that night, after everyone had gone quiet and the dishwasher hummed its lullaby, I sat across from Vernon in the den. Just the two of us. I mentioned the accounts, barely even raising my voice. He leaned back in the chair like he'd been waiting for this. You wouldn't understand, Pauline, he said, sipping his bourbon. It's family planning. We're taking care of everyone. You used my name. He chuckled. And look at how well it's worked out. You're welcome, by the way. Your money's working for all of us. I kept my voice even. I'd like to see the numbers. He shook his head, amused. You're making this harder than it needs to be. After he left the room, I sat there for a long time. The lamp cast a small circle of light on the rug. I whispered, just loud enough to hear myself think. Then it's time it gets hard. Later, I went to the home office. No plan, just instinct. The drawer squeaked as I pulled it open, rows of file folders, neat and too orderly. I flipped through tax forms, bank slips, none with my full name. At the bottom, under an old issue of Money Digest, I found a thick envelope. It was labeled Family Consolidation Plan. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. That label said everything. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't mismanagement or oversight. This was theft. Planned. Structured. Hidden under the words for the family. I held the envelope in my hands, felt its weight. Then, I slid it back into place, carefully, like it was glass. Not to hide it, but to give myself time to learn how to speak their language. They built their empire on my silence. I got there early. 10 minutes before the doors unlocked. The Texas morning hadn't yet shaken off its chill, but I was sweating under my blazer. The woman in the window motioned for me to come in. I did. Inside, everything was polished to a fault, floors you could eat off, counters so smooth they looked wet. The air smelled like printer toner and faint perfume. Ms. Geller remembered me. She offered the same professional smile, but I didn't return it this time. I need a private room, I said, handing her my ID and the printout I brought. We walked down a hallway that somehow made me feel smaller with every step. As soon as the door clicked behind us, I sat down and braced myself. "It's one thing to suspect," I told her. "It's another to sit face to face with proof." She nodded without judgment, pulled up the account information. 3 accounts. All active. One in my name, supposedly. Except the listed primary wasn't me. Vernon. And Julian was named with full access rights. "I need to know when this account was opened," I asked. My voice didn't tremble, but my heart did. Ms. Geller clicked through screens, each one confirming what I didn't want to believe. "Automatic deposits. Monthly. Years worth." "When was the last time I signed any of this?" She paused. "We don't have a signature on file for you. Everything came through under administrative authorization." The door opened. Julian stepped inside. "As Sunday. Like this was a meeting about car insurance." "You're here?" I asked, breath caught halfway. "Dad asked me to help with your accounts," he said. "You were okay with it." "When?" "I don't know. A while ago. It was never a big deal." I stared at him. There was a moment, years ago, maybe. A conversation half finished in the driveway, me nodding out of politeness. That's what he turned into consent. I didn't say another word. I stood, thanked Ms. Geller, and walked out with copies of every statement. In the parking lot, I held the papers tight against my chest like they were fragile. They weren't just numbers. They were 8 years of me. By the time evening came, I'd driven straight back to the Woodlands. The Holt estate sat lit like a Hallmark card, pillars, porch lights, and a wide open door. Dinner had already started. I could smell lemon butter and garlic from the driveway. Inside, the table looked like a magazine spread. White linen, candles, laughter. Vernon sat at the head, carving salmon like a king feeding his court. "To the future," he said, raising his glass. "And the steady hand that keeps our finances strong." Julian lifted his glass too. Everyone followed. Except me. I cleared my throat. "Would it be okay if I reviewed the family investment plan?" Forks stopped. Conversation halted mid-sentence. Vernon turned to me slowly. "Sweetheart," he said, the words stretched like taffy, "these are adults' matters." I smiled at him. Not wide. Just enough to be polite. Inside, something turned. A lever. A switch. Later that night, Julian and I were back in our room. He loosened his tie. I didn't bother with small talk. "I found the accounts," I said. "I found out where my salary went." He sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "Pauline, your father-in-law said it was for everyone." I trusted him. I nodded. "Trust doesn't erase consent." He looked down. "I want full access. I want the ledger. And I want it tomorrow." He glanced up, tried to soften the moment. "Let's talk when Dad gets back." There it was, the stall. The familiar shuffle, the Holt way. I walked past him to the window, looked out over the quiet cul-de-sac, then said quietly, more to myself than to him, "If nothing changes tomorrow, I'll stop paying." I practiced the words in the mirror until they felt like steel. My face didn't flinch. No tremble in the voice, no blink in the eyes. "They won't expect me to talk like I mean it," I muttered. That was the truth. For years, I'd been the one who smoothed over the rough edges. The one who stayed quiet for peace. Not today. Lennox left for school like every other morning. Backpack on, headphones in, barely looking up as he walked out the door. I told him I was taking a mental health day. He didn't ask questions. He knew better than to press. By 9, I had everything printed. I reviewed every document, stapled each page with precision, and slid them into a red folder labeled in bold marker, "Pauline's Notice." Not dramatic. Not subtle. Just unmistakable. I set the folder on the desk in Vernon's study, aligned the chairs, wiped the dust from the glass tabletop. This wasn't a meeting. This was a reckoning. I sat down, hands folded, waiting for the 2 men who had built their comfort on the assumption I wouldn't dare challenge them. When they entered, they did so with smirks. Julian raised an eyebrow. "All this set up for us?" Vernon chuckled. "Did someone forget our anniversary?" I didn't move. "Sit." Julian glanced at his father, then pulled out a chair. Vernon followed, slower, like he was indulging a child's tantrum. I opened the folder and slid 2 copies across the table. "Here's a list of accounts where my name was used without consent," I said. "And here, these are the legal discrepancies in your so-called family consolidation plan." Vernon leaned back, hands behind his head. Sweetheart, that's not how family works. No, I said. It's how theft works. Julian's tone was more measured. Pauline, this is about survival. We're keeping things together the only way we know how. No unit survives by cannibalizing itself, I said, locking eyes with him. You trained me to float your father's pride. I slid the folder back into my bag. You have 48 hours. Either return full control of my finances, or I escalate this, publicly and legally. Vernon smirked like he'd just watched a commercial he didn't buy into. You won't do it. I stood. Watch me. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't raise my voice. I let the silence speak for me. Later that afternoon, I met Denise at a small cafe tucked between an old bookstore and a pharmacy that hadn't updated its signage since the 80s. She looked up from the stack of documents and shook her head. This is bad, she said. Really bad. I stirred my coffee. I know. It's not just unethical. This is criminal. Misappropriation of funds, identity misuse. If we push this, it won't just be a slap on the wrist. I nodded. I'm ready. Denise outlined a plan, slow, cautious, but effective. We'd start by notifying the company's legal department. She'd handle the follow-up. All quiet. All clean. While we talked, an older woman in the booth behind us leaned forward. Don't let him guilt you. Quiet, honey. I looked at her, stunned. She didn't wait for a response. Just sipped her tea like she dropped truth and didn't need applause. That hit me harder than any of Vernon's jabs. My mother used to say, what you allow is what will continue. She'd whisper it when folding clothes after one of my father's shouting matches. I wasn't folding anything anymore. That night, I texted Julian, we talk tomorrow. Just us. No Vernon. He didn't reply. The next evening, we sat across from each other in the home office. No music. No background TV. Just the weight of what I knew and what he refused to face. I have proof, I said. Proof that you let your father use my identity. If you defend him again, you're defending what he did to me. He rubbed his forehead like he was nursing a headache. You think I wanted this? I didn't plan any of it. But you let it happen, I said. And then you stayed silent. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Is this really where we are? No, I said. This is where you left me. He didn't argue. He just sat there, eyes on the desk, shoulders slumped. I walked out, leaving him to sit with the weight of his own silence. The house was dim. The hallway stretched long and empty. I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter, typed every word with purpose. Subject line, official notification of financial misrepresentation. Recipient, Holt Enterprises Legal. I attached everything. BCC'd Denise. Press send. Then I printed a copy, locked it in the safe, and poured a glass of water. As I leaned against the counter, glass in hand, I whispered, you can only ignore a fire alarm for so long before the smoke chokes you. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of everything shifting. The dawn was quiet when I arrived at my home study. The blinds were drawn just enough so that the streetlights still glowed faintly outside. My laptop sat open, the coffee cup next to it untouched, cold. I pressed a key and the screen lit up. Today the game changed. The gloves are off, I thought, but I'm still wearing the smile they expect. The facade of the dutiful wife was gone. My role was shifting. I drafted the list of demands, a full audit, removal of my name from every account, legal acknowledgement of what had been done. No more hiding behind polite silences. Frank Sinatra once said, the greatest revenge is massive success. I adapted that for myself. I hit send on the first demand email. The cursor blinked like a pulse, waiting. My heart raced, not in fear, but in steady purpose. This morning I became the one holding the board, not someone sitting across it. Meeting Denise in that small downtown conference room felt like stepping into a courtroom set. The table was strewn with printouts, bank records, red ink stamps, folder after folder labeled with names and dates. She pointed to a header, identity misuse, unauthorized transfers, misappropriated funds. They'll retaliate, Denise warned. They always do. I sat back, calm. Let them try, I replied. We prepared the formal letter addressed to Holt Enterprises, certified mail, receipt pages, evidence bundles. The red folder wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was the file of truth. Each page I handed her felt like a weight lifting from my chest. But the anxiety curled at my stomach. Could I walk away if they refused? Could I really leave the person I married, or the hyper-loyal man he'd become? I made copies. I mailed the letter with a click. The door closed behind us, and as we walked out I realized, I was no longer the silent one. Dinner that night shattered the calm. Julian sat at the head of the table, his father absent, his mobile buzzing, his face tense though he tried to hide it. I said, quietly enough for no one to hear but loud enough for Julian, "Your dad knows I sent the letter." He didn't respond. Vernon stepped into the room, brandy glass in hand, with a mock smile. "You're making this harder on everyone," he said, voice low so the others wouldn't hear. But I did. I held my fork like a shield. "I made it harder on myself by staying silent for 8 years, I replied evenly. A hush fell. Julian stood, voice shaky, "I'm caught between you and my father." I looked him in the eyes, "Or you were always on the side paying the price." I rose from the table, something I had never done before. My name remained on the plate. The chair creaked as I pushed back. "Excuse me." I walked out. The garage was cold when I sat in my car, still in my blazer, the seatbelt on, phone in hand. A call appeared, Vernon Holt. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen. If I answered, I would step back in. If I didn't, I stepped forward. I chose forward. I deleted the missed call. The red folder sat on the front seat beside me. I opened it and exhaled. Tomorrow, I told myself, they'll start to panic. The silence in the car wasn't still, it was waiting. And I was ready when they finally roared. I arrived at Vernon's study just as the winter morning light began to soften the room. The blinds were drawn tight, the air felt dense, like someone had held their breath for too long. I stood inside the doorway while he looked up, surprised. He expected the quiet one. He saw something else. They believed I was out of moves, I told myself, they've just walked into mine. I laid a formal notice on his desk, clear and deliberate. I was stepping out of the trust fund that carried my name without my permission. His expression flickered. He leaned back and said, "You know what you're doing?" I nodded. I quoted aloud, "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." He did not smile. Julian burst in, calling up the stairs, but Vernon held up a hand, "Not yet." I left the room. The first blow had landed. The war had begun. Later, in a quiet cafe near downtown, I met Evelyn, the housekeeper who'd served the family for decades. The world outside buzzed, ceiling fans, coffee machines, low hum of conversation, but our table stayed contained. She handed me an old photograph of a Christmas party at the Holt estate. There I was, smiling, surrounded, but if you looked closely, my name was missing from the commemorative plaque behind the dinner table. Evelyn said softly, "You were always the background, and they made sure you stayed there." My shock turned into cold clarity. The campaign of invisibility was intentional. I laid out the dossier, accounts, the consolidation plan, the bylaw amendments Vernon had quietly slipped through. She studied each page, then looked me in the eye. "You're not asking for permission. You're reclaiming your role." I slid out of the cafe, heart pounding, saying under my breath, "The mirror they held up to me is shattered, I'll use the shards to rebuild." I felt it deep. This time I wasn't fighting for a place at their table. I was building my own. That evening the Whitlow/Holt estate was alive with people, laughter, clinking glasses, birthday cheers for Dakota. I sat at the table while Vernon stood to speak. "Thanks to Odessa's contributions, we're positioned for the next decade." The words landed like a blow. I interrupted. "Contributions I didn't authorize." The room went silent. Julian's gaze dropped. Noreen gripped her napkin. Leona shifted in her chair. I continued, "I asked for the ledger. I asked for transparency. I was ignored. So now I'm here to ask for accountability." Vernon's voice was cold. "This is how family business works." I stood up. "Then we're no longer family business." I walked out, leaving the room in stunned quiet. The estate grew quiet behind me, the reflection of firelight on the windows followed as I walked to my car. "They'll come after me tomorrow, and I'll be ready," I thought. On the porch at home, I sat with my notebook and a low glass of water, my hands slightly shaking from the adrenaline. I wrote, "They underestimated the quiet one." My phone lit up, Vernon's name on the screen. The message, "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. I deleted the notification. I closed the notebook. Threats are just announcements, they cannot stop me, I told the night. I switched off the porch light, stepped inside, feeling the world turn on its hinges. Tomorrow they'd learn what goes unseen but never unfelt. The first flakes had started to fall by the time I stepped into the boardroom. Snow drifting down slow and soft across the tall windows behind the long table. The room smelled like fresh paper, hot coffee, and fake pleasantries. Polite applause echoed as Vernon announced the company's latest acquisition, a shiny new asset I recognized too well. It was mine. Something I helped seed, shape, breathe life into, now served to a room that forgot whose hands first watered the soil. I didn't sit at my usual place. I moved straight to the head of the table. No announcement. No hesitation. Just presence. 2 envelopes. I laid them flat in front of me. One with Vernon's name. The other labeled media release. If I had to burn this place down, I'd already packed the matches. They told me silence was the safest place, I thought. But they never mentioned it becomes a prison when you forget your own voice. No one laughed. No one interrupted. They waited. I opened the folder Evelyn gave me. The photo, Christmas party. Everyone smiling. The family plaque behind us, carved in gold. No sign of my name. "You erased me from history," I said, holding the photo up, "to keep me in debt." Chairs shifted. Vernon leaned forward, lips parted. Julian blinked slowly, swallowing something hard. I slid the ledger across. Names. Numbers. Transactions. Signatures I never gave. My identity used to prop up holdings, to clean books, to secure lines of credit. It wasn't bookkeeping. It was identity theft in pearls and cufflinks. "You've got 2 hours, I said calmly, "to reverse every unauthorized transfer tied to my name. After that, this file goes to the press, and the IRS." Vernon didn't move. "Don't look so surprised," I added, quieter. "You taught me that quiet women are safest. I learned that safe is a good way to die standing still." Eyes darted around the table. The shift had happened. I wasn't a footnote anymore, I was the headline. Vernon shoved his chair back and stormed out. Julian followed. I caught Vernon's voice through the open corridor, "She's declared war, and I still can't believe we let her name sign that check." I sat there. Still. Then turned to Leona and Noreen. "Does it feel like family when someone else owns your work?" Leona looked away, then back at me. No words, just a blink that lasted too long. I knew that look. Silent complicit eyes were still accomplice eyes. I gathered my papers. "I'll wait in the car." One by one they left the room. The storm outside started to thicken, white lacing the glass, wind brushing against concrete. A staffer wandered in late, confused by the tension, clutching a folder meant for someone no longer in power. In the car, heater humming low, I sat without turning the engine. My phone buzzed. Inbox. Locked file. Subject, transfer authorization, Holt Enterprises. I tapped it open. The signature glared back at me. My name. My handwriting. My date. I traced it slowly with my finger. It wasn't just forged, it was practiced. Rehearsed. They used my name to sell off what I built. But the buyer. I'd met with them last month. I'd spoken plainly. Signed a clause of retraction. They didn't know the original authorization was fake, but they were more than willing to correct it once proof surfaced. And I had the proof. "They used my name to sell what I built," I whispered. "Now I own the buyer. And I'll close the check." I set the phone down, pressed the ignition. The garage lit up in red tail lights as I pulled out into the swirl of snow. The storm outside met the one inside, and for the first time, I didn't flinch from it. I woke up before the sun. No alarm. Just stillness. The kind that doesn't beg to be filled. It had been a long time since silence felt like a choice. Light crept in through the blinds, soft and filtered. I sat at the edge of my desk in the new office, a space I leased on my own terms. The walls smelled like fresh paint and books that hadn't yet been read. And there it was, tucked under an old calendar I'd forgotten to toss out, an envelope. Postmarked 3 weeks back. Addressed in Leona's handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside, a letter. The paper held the weight of regret. She wrote about her silence. About sitting at the same table, nodding at Vernon's lies, pretending not to notice what she knew I hadn't signed. She said she was ashamed. She called herself a coward. Said if healing was ever possible, this was her first step. Enclosed was a check, her share. What she said I was owed. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I folded the check back into the envelope, slid it into my drawer, and locked it without a word. That money didn't carry value anymore. I had what I needed, acknowledgement. And forward motion. Later that morning, I took a drive. Out past the city line. Past the memory-heavy streets. Toward the acres of land I'd bought years ago through a quiet trust. I never told anyone. It was mine long before I dared believe I'd ever use it. The wildflowers were just starting to bud. Birds sang like no one had warned them of winter. I stood beside the contractor's truck, blueprints spread across his hood. We went over final changes. No cold steel. No glass walls, I told him. I want something that holds warmth, but stands. He nodded. Soft light, strong frame. Got it. This wouldn't be a prize. Wouldn't be a monument to survival. This was the place where I'd raise a new version of my life. Not just build from ashes, but from intention. In my notebook, I wrote, I didn't just leave the fire, I learned how to build warmth without burning. I thought about Julian. A flicker, then gone. He didn't belong in the story I was writing anymore. He chose a version of comfort that didn't require him to grow. That wasn't my responsibility. Midweek, Vernon called. The number came through like a ghost. He said he was selling the last estate property, the cabin in the hills. Asked if I'd meet him. I agreed. Not for him. For me. The cafe was neutral. Public. A safe distance from every version of who we used to be. He started with charm. I didn't play along. I came for the paperwork, I said. He leaned in. You really want to walk away from everything we built? You built it with my silence, I said flatly. Your legacy is the echo of the silence you demanded. His eyes narrowed. You think you've won? I slid the deed across the table. I already own the cabin. Bought it through an LLC. You're just here to sign what's already done. His hands trembled. Mine didn't. I signed. Stood up. Left him sitting with his untouched coffee. Closure wasn't a bang. It wasn't some dramatic slam of the door. It was the simple sound of my own footsteps, calm, steady, walking away. A week later, I returned to my land one more time before the build began. I stood on the raw soil and closed my eyes. I imagined Sunday dinners in a sunlit kitchen. A community book club and a den filled with laughter. A young woman who might knock on my door one day, looking for someone to believe her. And me, finally having the space to say, I do. In my final journal entry of this chapter, I wrote, I was never a victim. I was a mirror. And when they could no longer avoid their own reflection, they shattered. I placed the notebook in a sealed tin. And I buried it deep beneath the spot where the cornerstone would be laid. This story didn't end with revenge. It ended with rebuilding.